obviously you're a reporter, the film is about the reporting that you did. I wanted to talk about, I want to you could tell us a little bit about the decision to revisit the footage, which is extremely painful, I imagine, and to make a film out of it.
First of all, yeah, the sound. Let me adjust. Michelle, thank you for being here. And I want to thank my team, Evgeny Maloletka and Vasilisa Stepanenko, because the survival in the war zone, and especially in places like Mariupol, is depending on your team and how dedicated you are to each other. And I want to thank Jordan Dykstra, our composer, who is here with us today. So, and I want to thank you, because at the time which we live in now, it's for your heart not to close yourself and to care. We are constantly bombarded by so many tragedies. We are constantly exposed to stories of loss, and the easiest solution is just to shut down and turn away, but you didn't, so thank you for that. And that brings me to your question. When we left Mariupol, the next day, Mariupol Drama Theater was bombed, and up to 500 people died in that strike, and we were not there. No one was there, and it was very hard to understand what happened, what's the scale. It took us months to reconstruct the events that happened that day. And that again kind of proves why it's so important for journalists to be in the place where human rights are violated or the war crimes are unfolding. But also at the same time, I felt so angry and so frustrated that we weren't there. We weren't there to tell the stories of these people, and I really wanted to do more. I was kind of thinking, already being in Mariupol, that it is such a symbolic and big story, but the decision to make a film came when we left, because, well, the main concern in Mariupol was how to survive and how to get the original files out. So I put aside the dream to make a film. But when we left, when we were out, then when we started speaking with Michelle and PBS Frontline to do that. So it's very important in a time when every day there is something new happening, every day there is tragedy, not only in Ukraine, but in more and more places. And it feels like it's all connected, it feels like it's all keeps repeating, and we tend to forget about what happened even yesterday. So sometimes cinema, documentary films is the only way to preserve the memory of such an important event, important for Ukrainian history, important editorially, journalistically, but also important for the whole world. Because again, at least for me, now it feels like a start of a new page in a world's history. Not necessarily very optimistic page, but I'm sure we can get through it.
I'm wondering, for a question for both of you. It's such a very personal film. In a lot of ways, it has its roots in journalism, and it's very documentary. But you take a lot of time to position yourself in the film as the person who's going through this. And you talk about it in a very human way, and you even talk about the mistakes you made at certain points and the regrets you have heard on that. I'm wondering if you can talk about what it's like to sort of change your hat from having made these images as a journalist and then putting it in a first-person narration, and how you work with someone else to bring out your own story.
Right, it definitely wasn't my first choice to narrate the film. I tried really hard not to do that, really. Then when we thought it's going to be a still a personal story, then I even wanted to ask someone else to narrate it. So I resisted for a very long time. And the reason for that is because I didn't want to draw attention from people whose stories we are telling, from their resilience and from their tragedies to my story. So, but at that time we already knew that the theme of journalism is an important part of the film. It's an important part of everything that happened to Mariupol because of the waves of misinformation and misinterpretation. So that was kind of an established theme that we wanted to talk about, and therefore journalistic perspective was acceptable. So again, it's not a story of journalists, it's just a perspective, but still a story of a city. So it took us a while to find a right tone to the narration, to find a right words, not to pull attention to us. Yeah, so you can continue.
Thank you. I'll also echo Mstyslav's thanks for being here. I guess part of, for me, in the edit, not turning away was in part because I think I was listening to Mstyslav talk about what he had just seen and the footage that he had gathered and was continuing to gather at the time. We started working on the film days after he had left the city with the hard drive of footage, and AP and Frontline have a long-standing collaboration, and we were connected and we're doing Zoom calls, you know, in the evening and through the night as he was then waking up the next day to go continue covering the war. Bucha happened in the middle of, you know, these conversations that we were having, and I think hearing him talk about what I was logging and witnessing in the footage was a way to not turn away, because I felt like you were alongside someone who was telling you, please look. And so that definitely inspired the edit and part of, you know, my feeling that Mstyslav's voice and perspective belonged in the story and worked there too.
But I think also choosing more personal, that's what we spoke a lot, choosing an approach where things are personal, when the author is also part of the community, and sometimes you're just not filming, you just have conversation. So like being through these tragedies with someone to guide you also makes it in a way easier to process. And then also that's what we found out, kind of we understood that we're seeing something extraordinary. Every time there is someone suffering, even in the worst moments, they're never alone. And that suddenly gave us a lot of hope, because neighbors, doctors, firefighters, journalists sometimes, there is always someone near, the one who suffers. And that kind of shows even a larger identity, larger feeling of a community and identity that many of Ukrainians felt when the full-scale invasion started.
Yeah, I think that you touched on that also with the role of journalism in that the way you talk about the frustration of how difficult it was to impart knowledge about what was going on, even to the people who were living it and experiencing it. I think that that's a really beautiful way that you think about journalism and present the role of the journalist in this film. That you're there not only to tell the story of the world, but also to sort of tell the stories of the people who are actually living it and how to make sense of it.
I kind of lost hope in the larger sense, in the power of journalism to actually go and change something. Even well, it was like 9 years ago when invasion just started in Ukraine, and I was there. Everything was new for me, and I just started conflict journalism, and not because I really wanted it, but because the war just started. in Ukraine, and Russia just invaded Ukraine, so I automatically became a conflict journalist. And I was in Donbass, and Russia shot down the MH17 airplane. You saw some of those images in the memory sequences. And it was a horrifying experience. Again, hundreds of bodies, burning plane, terrible. And I thought, I was young and hopeful, and I thought that's gonna change stuff. That's gonna, countries get involved, the conversation starts. They're all gonna sit around the table, and there will be a ceasefire. There will be understanding, and there will be investigation, justice. Here we are now, 9 years later, things are getting worse. Not only in Ukraine. So I kind of lost the hope, but at the same time, I never lost the hope that journalism can change something directly as events unfolding. Green Corridor was negotiated because we were able to send at least some from what we filmed and what we took pictures of, and hundreds or thousands of people were able to leave the city. Therefore, their lives were saved. So, I mean, that's already a lot to justify all the risk and all the work.
I'd love to open it up to the audience. We have time for a few questions. We'll try to get to as many people as we can. You can raise your hands. Right here, please.
What would you say to someone who wanted to get involved with this type of work?
What would you say to somebody who wanted to get involved with this, with doing journalism like this?
Conflict journalism, you mean? Right?
Yeah.
Do you need practical advices or general advices?
A little both, maybe?
It's going to be very damaging for your family and for your personal life. But anyway, that's another story. Languages, that's I think intuitively the first thing that is practical and very important. Unless you know the language, you understand the culture, you connect with people. Unless you want to be like just parachuting down, shooting and running or like whatever, and that's not good journalism. So to follow up the stories, to go deeper, you definitely need to study several languages. Let's say Spanish, French. Ukrainian? Yeah, English, obviously. I mean, depending where you want to work. So that's what it is. Then the second is the team. It was not a coincidence that I first and always try to say I thank my team, because when you can't do this alone. You can, but it's psychologically almost impossible, for me at least, it's psychologically almost impossible to handle this alone. And from just a safety protocol perspective, you need to have someone, and that someone has to be your friend, someone who you trust. So building your team and kind of going together, that's I think is also quite crucial. But it's not the only way to, again, I said I lost hope for that journalism can change something directly, but I think what it does, and what's very important, the main role of journalism anyway, is to pass important information from one person to another person, from one society to another society, and documentary for that matter too, just in a different medium. And you saw in the film how devastating it is for the modern society, which is deeply interconnected, to lose connection, to lose access to news, to lose access to each other. It's so much more destructive than losing food and water, actually. So, that is a good motivation to keep people connected. So what I'm trying to say is that's not the only medium to make people care. And then again, I want to address the same thing. There are more and more people in the world who just don't care. And those people who are radical, they are taking advantage of that. And that makes our world a more dangerous place every day. So what we can do as documentarians, journalists, artists, there are many mediums that could serve this same purpose of making people care, not only about their small world, which is incredibly important, but we live in the time when everybody should care, because if we don't, then we just will find ourselves in the middle of ruins. That's what happened to us. You know, I was a kid, and in the school there was an old teacher who taught me to. All the kids at that time were going through military kind of a preparation for military service. So he would teach you to shoot a gun or just to march. We all thought it was the most stupid lesson in the school, and he was always drunk. It was silly time spending. However, the absurd thought was, why would we even need to study this? We live in a modern age. There are no enemies around us. It's just absurd. Well, and suddenly it wasn't, and nobody expected that. So you could live in the most peaceful country in the world and find yourself in the middle of war tomorrow. You never know. And to make sure that this doesn't happen, we need to make sure that people around us care or where the countries are going.
Thank you. In the back there, please.
Yeah, well, first question, I was just going to second what he said, but it was a perfect answer, and I agree. I mean, I've already started learning Ukrainian, so Duje Yaku, butchered that. But the question really is, I mean, you know, when you have such a large scale of human tragedy, and you have to balance the personal side of the stories that really gives it the meaning with the scale and those two different types of things, how did you find that, and were there any difficulties with balancing those two?
It's a good question. You know, so I guess you have to have your perspective in the head before you start working, obviously. And my perspective, I'm still a visual journalist. That's my unofficial work title. Therefore, I focus on daily news, and that's my perspective. But that's not the only perspective, especially when you work with documentary. And actually making this film did change the way I look at the news. Even in the film, you could see that, well, I mean, you don't really see that, but if you look through it again, you will see that the first days are filmed very much like news dispatches, but further you go, the editing changes and the storytelling changes. So even then I understood that I need to change the way I see it. I try to tell these stories. But yeah, choosing the perspective from which you're saying, according to the type of story you're trying to tell. There are stories which need to be told in the multitude of voices to underline the scale of those stories. There are stories which are very personal, and still those stories still should feel personal. But there are stories that need to be told through the very, very narrow perspective. And that's actually, I think, that modern cinema documentary cinema would benefit from, having this narrow in the vision, because again, so much noise, so much stories happening around us, and so keeping that in mind, I think you can find a way to tell the story you want.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but I do want to say thanks to the collaboration between Frontline and AP. The film is going to be broadcast.
Yes, 21st of February on PBS Frontline. Oh,
November.
sorry, excuse me. I'm in Ukraine already. Or yet. Yeah, I'll come back to Ukraine very soon. November 21st, PBS Frontline. And
Streaming for free. So please tell your friends and communities. This film will be available for free, PBS Frontline, but we put all of our films on YouTube also, so it's very easy to access them. So please share.
I just want to, not to finish on a pessimistic note, so a few things. The doctors who you saw on, in Mariupol and that hospital number 2, the tank did shoot the hospital. It killed one patient. They shot exactly under the place we were standing and filming from. But the doctors, a couple of days later, when everything was occupied, they couldn't work and they gathered and they left, and now they re-established the hospital in Kiev, so they're fine. Vladimir is well, but he was recently injured by double tap of a Russian rocket, and his lungs were pierced by shrapnel. He had multiple injuries, but he's getting better, and he keeps like, I need to go back. I need to keep working. The families, of course, there is unrepairable loss that is done to those families who lost their children, their loved ones, in their city forever. But Mariupol residents, even after watching the film, there were like several screenings just for Mariupol residents, and it's amazing that to feel that they are going through collective treatment, through collective acceptance, and there is the sense of this community together, that they're getting through this. And just a week ago, we met a boy that you saw in the maternity hospital bombing, the one who was looking for his mom. I kind of always remembered his face, and only a couple of weeks ago we found them finally, that family, and he's fine. His sister gave birth to a healthy child. They lived in basement for weeks, and then they escaped. Now they're all in Europe, and they also saw the film, and they're okay. So people are amazing at coming back to life. People are amazing at reconstructing, and just one last thing. Sorry, I just want to be slightly positive. I was, after Mariupol, after Bucha and Kharkiv, I went to a media conference in Rome, and as I was driving through the city with my friend, I was so upset. I couldn't look at the city because it was so vibrant and so beautiful. People were happy, and in my head, Mariupol was all burnt and destroyed. And I said, I can't just stop thinking about Mariupol, looking at all these happy people and this beauty. And he said, Mstyslav, do you know how many times Rome was conquered and burned down? Just don't worry. Everything will be fine.